Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Before we start, yes, Sunday Youth can go out. Before we start, I just want to show you some things that have been happening over the past couple of days. Have you just got the first slide? Oh, the slide. That was last night, just the quiz night before. Yes. So on Friday night for the youth group, we invited the parents to come along as well. It was a great night. I think we had about 70 people here, so it was probably one of the best quizzes that anybody's ever been to, really. It's probably the best one. As you can see there, the prizes we had that hamper, and we had an iPad, and it's a wonderful gift to receive, an iPad, and lots of people were questioning whether it was legitimate. It was definitely a legitimate iPad, and so in the kind of the fashion of Jesus, we actually gave the iPad to the losing team. The first will be last, and the last will be first. And it was what it was. It was actually an iPad. It was a clinical iPad that you would put on your eye if you hurt your eye. So the losing team, it's a very practical gift. But it was a great night. It was excellent. And have you just got the next slide as well? So this was last night. We had the Thanksgiving meal. You can see it was great as well. It was wonderful for the young adults. You can still see some of the decorations around this morning. If you look at the bottom left here, I think Frosty's just been out, but we had a very ancient tradition with the Thanksgiving meal, and it's to everybody takes a bite out of the pumpkin, a raw pumpkin. I had a bite, Nate had a bite, I think Nathaniel had a bite, Jacques had a bite, and the trick is you have to bite where other people have bitten. So you get all the saliva, this is what community is. No, you don't. You buy in a different place. We were hygienic, and it's not really an ancient tradition. We just made it up on the day, but it was a lot of fun, anyways. So that was great. And also, I just want to give a big thanks as well to the team. So especially Maggie and Jennifer. Where's Jennifer? Jennifer at the back. These guys made the food for the Thanksgiving meal. Awesome job, like really. The Inner Ways had a part to play as well. Michaela was there, Brooke was there. Lots of people came together to make this happen for the Thanksgiving meal. That was excellent. And for the Friday as well, we had the youth team. It was really, really good effort. Really, really grateful. So thank you very much. And we actually have a lot of food left over. So we're still working out what to do with that. I might just take it home. But no, we'll share it in the spirit of Jesus. Okay, let's pray before we come to the word. Heavenly Father, we thank you again for this Christmas period, this Christmas season. And as David was saying before and talking before about Jesus being the wonderful counselor, and he is the wonderful counselor, miraculous counselor, indescribable, extraordinary, the one who works all things together for good. Sometimes we don't understand how that works. Sometimes we don't see how that works. Sometimes it makes no sense to us. But however, we are held in your hand, which we are thankful for. In Jesus' name, amen. So, wonderful counselor, Christmas period. I've been thinking about this for the past week or so, and I visited, looking for Christmas presents, I visited a store in in Midland, a bookstore. And I walked down one of the aisles, and typically, in most bookstores, there's an aisle that has like spirituality, self-help, and so on and so forth. And as I walked down this aisle, on the right-hand side was spirituality, Christianity, Buddhism, Islam. On the far left-hand side, there was the kind of pop psychology, particular books. I can't remember the names of the books that were there, so I Googled it just as some kind of popular self-help books. The Secret Law of Attraction. Another one, I Will Teach You How to Be Rich. Sounds great. The Power of Now. These are in the self-help areas. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Another one was called The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. It's weird. And then there's the 48 Laws of Power. That's a lot of laws, 48 laws. I mean, I don't know if I could remember all of them. And so you've got the spirituality, and then you've got the pop psychology. And there was a new section in the middle, and it was kind of orientated around witchcraft. So you can kind of dabble in whatever you want to go in. So I looked at some books regarding witchcraft, and there was like the spell book for new witches, The Modern Guide to Witchcraft. One was called The Crooked Path, an introduction to traditional witchcraft, and The Crooked Path. So anyways, but I saw all of this, and I thought, this is new. Like the kind of like the New Agey stuff, that was kind of new in this book, so I've never noticed it before. But the principle, the idea behind this, is that people are seeking something. So whether they're seeking spirituality in some form, or whether they're seeking pop psychology, or whether they're seeking witchcraft, they're seeking something, seeking guidance, seeking counsel. Often we want to know what's going to happen in the future. We want to know what, if the decision which we're making is right. Help us, guide us, and so we're kind of seeking for, searching for this. We search in all different areas as humanity. And so I was thinking about this and thinking about this chapter, and Jesus being the wonderful counselor. So I'll read the text, and then we'll go further into it. So this is Isaiah chapter 9, verses 2 to 7. It says, "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. A light has dawned on those living in the land of darkness. You have enlarged the nation and increased its joy. The people have rejoiced before you, and they rejoice at harvest time, and as they rejoice when dividing spoils. For you have shattered their oppressive yoke and the rod on their shoulders, the staff of their oppressor, just as you did on the day of Midian. For every trampling boot of battle and the bloody garments of war will be burned as fuel for the fire. For a child will be born for us." So this is the prediction. This is Jesus coming. "A son will be given to us. The government will be upon his shoulders. He'll be named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. The dominion will be vast, and its prosperity will never end. He will reign on the throne of David and over his kingdom to establish and sustain it with justice and righteousness from now on and forever. The zeal of the Lord of armies will accomplish this." So I thought it's important that when we look at this passage, often you get like Isaiah 9:6 is in Christmas cards, you see it on calendars, and there's not always the context around it. Like, why was this given? Why was this promise given at that particular time? And the context of Isaiah chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9, it's in the context of a particular king. Ahaz was his name, King Ahaz of Judah. And what was going on at that time is that Ahaz was ruling and reigning in Judah. Have we just got the map slide, please, Brian? And so Ahaz is ruling. You can see there in the southern kingdom, Jerusalem, Judah, that's where Ahaz is. And then you've got Israel, and then you've got Aram, however you want to pronounce it, or Syria. And then you've got Assyria on the far right there. And what was going on is that you had Israel and Aram, or let's just call it Syria, that's the other name for it. Israel and Syria are wanting to form a coalition to come against Assyria. And they're saying to Ahaz in Judah, they're saying, hey, form a coalition with us, come into coalition so we can kind of have more power and then we can go against Assyria. And Ahaz is like saying, I'm not having a bar of this. I'm not going to do it. Ahaz wasn't a good guy either, but he's like, I'm not having a bar of this. And then Syria and Israel, what they're also saying is, well, Ahaz, if you're not going to have a bar of this, if you're not going to join us, then we'll kind of get rid of you and we'll put in a king. We'll put in another king that's going to support us. Same thing happens today, right? Governments might try and displace a government and try and put somebody who's supporting their government in place. And so that's what's happening here. Anyway, so Ahaz is saying no. And what he decides to do instead, he goes to Assyria. He goes to Assyria, the ruling power, the big power at the time, and he takes some gold from the temple. He takes it to Assyria, and he says, hey, stand up for me. And then Assyria comes in and takes out Syria, or Aram, and takes out Israel as well. And then they also kind of lay lots of taxes upon Judah, and idolatry comes into Judah because of Ahaz's choice. So all that happens, and at that same time as well, this is where the context of chapter 7, 8, and 9 come in. Isaiah comes to Ahaz, and he says, Ahaz, don't do it. Don't join with Assyria, and don't be worried about Israel and Syria either. Don't be concerned about them. God has your back. And even Isaiah says to him, he says, God says, he says, if you want to test God in this, if you want a sign, you can ask for a sign. And Ahaz is like, I'm not going to ask for a sign. But this is God saying, you can ask for a sign. I'm going to confirm that I'm going to confirm that I'm going to protect you. And Ahaz is like, no. And he goes his own way. Goes into Assyria. And also what he does in Assyria as well, he falls in love with the place. He goes into the temple in Assyria. He sees the altar. And then he sends word back to Jerusalem and says, build the altar like the one in Assyria. absolutely loves it, partakes in the world, partakes in the enemy, does not listen to the counsel of God. The point here, what I want to kind of drill home here, is that Ahaz does not listen to the counsel of God. He goes his own way. God comes to him, don't do it, don't be worried about them, don't be worried about the world, don't become anxious about it. And Ahaz is like, nah, I'm going to go by my own wisdom, I'm going to go by my own counsel, and I'm going to do what I want to do. And he gets himself into trouble because of it. So what's said in this passage as well is that what happens in Judah and what you've just seen in the passage there, can we just have the slide on darkness? What happens in Judah at that time and in the context of this passage, just the next one, the other slide on darkness, next one. Yes, that one. So you've got this passage where it says, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light, and a light has dawned on those living in the land of darkness. That word darkness there is the same word, if you're familiar with Psalm 23, where it says that you will walk in the valley of the shadow of darkness. It's the same darkness, the valley of the shadow of darkness. So what's going on in Judah, what happens in Israel, what happens in Syria is darkness, shadow of darkness. And as I was thinking about this and thinking about the counsel of God, in fact, I was having a conversation I've had a few conversations about this actually, and I had a conversation the other day talking to a guy in the sauna about it. Typical place where I hang out. And we were talking about the belief in God, and we're talking about the return of Christ, actually. It keeps coming up. But anyways, we was talking about belief in God. And I said to him, God seems to have created the world in a particular way. That if somebody doesn't believe in God, if somebody doesn't follow Jesus, or even if somebody follows Jesus, God has kind of created the world in a particular way that his attributes are in the world. So if we make good choices, generally good things happen. If we make bad choices, bad things happen. So, so if I decide and say, well, each day, I'm going to get up in the morning and I'm going to have a beer before work. Then generally speaking, that life isn't good. I'm going to feel a bit groggy. I'm going to get a bit tired. Might get a bit cranky with my family. There's a choice that I can make. I can follow that path and things will get worse for me. If I want to start being unkind to people, if I want to be unkind to my wife and rude to my wife, life won't go well for me. God has created the world in a particular way where his attributes, it's like kindness, generosity, compassion. And I think you can see this broadly as well in the way that nations, so you can see the way that Ahaz took his choice and what happens to an entire nation. Think about the wars that have happened in this world. World War I, World War II, when a whole nation desires to embrace darkness, when they move away from God, when they distance themselves from God or reject themselves from God. Think of Nazi Germany, you think of Soviet Russia. World War II, nearly 85 million people were killed because somebody embraced darkness, because a leader embraced darkness, and therefore it affected all of the people. The same thing happens, the same pattern throughout. So I think whether somebody believes in God or somebody doesn't believe in God, we can see that the attributes of God are there. We can see that the beauty of creation, you can look at the stars, look at the sun, look at the moon, you can see creation, you can see everything about God in creation. But we can also choose to walk away from that. So even if somebody doesn't believe in Jesus, if they make the right choices, generally life can be good for them. Doesn't mean they're saved, doesn't mean there's salvation, but it means that life can be better. So have a look again at this passage. So the next slide there, you've got this darkness, the shadow of death, and this happens to us. We can walk into the shadow of death. The next part is this. So he says, the one about light. Nah. So I'll carry on. So with the darkness here, you've also got in chapter 9, verse 2, you've got the people in darkness have seen a great light. The people in darkness have seen a great light. Have you just got the slide with the time scale on it, please, Brian? So this is Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. For me, since coming to know Christ, this is one of the things that's always I've always marveled at, always thought it's wonderful, always thought it's amazing. You've got the darkness happening, and you've got Ahaz's choice, and you've got people's choices and the wrong choices, and yet God's plan, God's providence still goes on. So if you look at this verse, Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, For a child will be born for us. A son will be given to us. The government will be on his shoulders. He will be named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. When Isaiah's writing this, it's around the 8th century BC. It's about 700 years before Jesus. 700 years he predicts this. Lots of predictions in the Bible about Jesus' first coming. About 700 years before Jesus. That's the first part, so he writes that. And then you've got Jesus coming, the birth of Jesus Christ in the 1st century. So you have a look at this verse, Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, for a child will be born for us, a son will be given. That's the birth of Jesus. And then the next sentence, the next statement, and the government will be on his shoulders. He'll be named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. That is in the future. That has not happened yet. In one verse, you've got a span of at least 20, if Jesus comes in our lifetime, at least 2,700 years. To me, that's incredible. But it also says something else. It says something else. So I think sometimes prophecy can be a bit abstract. Predictions of Jesus' return can be a bit abstract. But there's something wonderful in this, something that speaks to us, I think. That we can make the right choices and we can make the wrong choices, but we're still in God's hand. Ahaz made the wrong choice, still in God's hand. God's plan still unfolds. For our lives, we can make the right choice, we can make the wrong choice, but we're still in God's hand. Like a child, I can think of my son. I might give him advice, do this, don't do this, and quite often he doesn't listen to me. Maybe that's my parenting, and he doesn't listen to me. However, he's still my son. I don't separate myself from him, and hopefully throughout his life he starts to listen to me. But either way, he's still my son. So I think the challenge for us in all of this is that when we're thinking about God's counsel, are we trusting God's counsel? Do we trust him in all of this? Ahaz decided not to listen to God's counsel. We're given a choice to listen to his counsel. We're given a choice to listen to God or not. However, even if we don't listen, God still does not abandon us. When I was thinking about this, I thought, how do we actually hear God's counsel? How do we hear God's guidance? How do we hear God's plan? If you're familiar with the scriptures, you'll know something of the, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right either, the Urim and the Thummim. Does anyone know what the Urim and the Thummim are? So apparently, there's some mystery behind this, but apparently it could have been, some people say that it was a white stone and a black stone. And when the high priest went into the temple, on his breastplate there, he would have had these two stones, the white stone and the black stone. And some people think it's really mystical that these stones, what you would do, you would use them and then you would ask, you'd be able to ask God a question. You could just ask him a question, and if it was a yes, perhaps the white stone would light with an aura, and if it was a no, the black stone would have a shadow over it. And so they used this. Sometimes it was abused, but they used this. The high priest would take it into the temple, and I was thinking this would be wonderful for us if we had the Urim and the Thummim. If you're thinking about who you want to marry, and you're like, should I marry this person, or should I marry this person? Create direction. Should I send my child to this school? Should I send my child to that school? Or perhaps, even if we're thinking about what we're going to have for tea tonight, Hungry Jack's or McDonald's, and God will give us the yes or God will give us the no. But it would be nice to have that. And sometimes God's counsel does come like that. We can hear a definitive yes, this is the way to go, or no, do not go that way. But quite often it's not always like that, is it? When we're trying to discern God's will, when we're trying to discern God's direction, it can be really challenging. And so there's some ways that I think that we can do this that's helpful to understand God's will. And the first one is community. To be in community. I'm always blown away at the way that God works in the community of people. So whether it be Israel, whether it be the church, whether it be kind of going all the way throughout history, God works through people. The challenge is if we separate ourselves from people, then we risk not hearing God's counsel. I think in our day, especially in Western-style countries, the temptation is that because it's very individualistic, the temptation is to say it's just Jesus and me. Jesus and me going for a walk on the beach together. And it's never just Jesus and us. It's Jesus and his people, Jesus and his community. It's really important. And I think we can do ourselves a disservice when we separate ourselves from people, when we separate ourselves from community. We risk not hearing the counsel of God. People get hurt in churches. You know, we can get hurt. There can be the temptation to back away and move back. But we risk then not hearing God, to lean in to everybody, to lean in into that community. The second thing is reading the scriptures. And I think there's many ways that we can read the scriptures to hear the counsel of God. The first one, which I always like, is when I wake up in the morning, I'll read a couple of chapters. Straight away, a couple of chapters. Read a couple of chapters from the Bible. And in doing that, we become familiar with the stories. Just becoming familiar with them. We don't have to dive in deep every single time, but just becoming familiar with the stories of the Bible so that when we're going through the things in our lives, these stories come to mind. We partake in God's story. We partake in God's narrative. We partake in God's redemption when we read the stories. The other part is that we go into a devotion. We look at one verse. We look at one chapter. We read the chapter. We reread the chapter. We let it soak in. We seek God's counsel. So from community and also reading the scriptures as well. The other way that I think we hear God's counsel, I've been listening to a book recently called Stay Focused. And this guy, he's done, I don't think he's a Christian actually, but he's done a lot of research on today's environment and the complexity of today's environment and the amount of information which we're receiving. So whether you're on social media, if you're on Facebook, if you're on Instagram, if you're watching TV, if you're looking at the news online, you think about if an event happens in the world today compared to what it might have been a generation ago, we can have like hourly updates about what's going on. And there would have been a time where you wouldn't have heard about it in the next day until you got the newspaper, then you read the newspaper, then you're aware of it. The amount of information that we're taking in all the time, and there's only so much which we can take in. And all this, I think, can make things fuzzy. It can make things murky. This guy was saying in this book that even in regards to concentration, you know, if you're working on a project and you become kind of really focused in it, and if somebody disrupts you from it, it takes about 23 minutes to actually get that focus back to the point where you were before. And you think about our day and age, you've got your mobile phone in your pocket, it vibrates, our attention is distracted, we're distracted. Do we come to that point of true focus, of deep focus, where we can actually hear and listen to the counsel of God? You know, I think about when I get home from work, and sometimes my mind's still all over the place, my mind's busy, mind's loaded up, and I get home and Knox is wanting to play with me. And he's saying, come outside and look at my vegetables, or Dad, come and play with my trucks. And Dad, come and play with me. And I'm like, hang on a minute. And then every time I walk past my phone, I'll pick it up, look at it. Like, just habit. It's like an addiction every single time. But then in doing so, I'm never being present with my son. I'm never with him. And I think the same, well, I am sometimes, and I think the same, talk myself down, but I think the same thing can happen with God as well. That when we become so distracted, we're never with him, and we miss his counsel. I think for me, when I'm praying as well, the best times of prayer is when I've been praying for over 20 minutes. If I'm just praying for 5 minutes, my mind's all over the place, everywhere. But I pray for 20 minutes, and somehow it's like a mystical time. My mind starts to settle. I can start to focus. I can start to listen. And it's hard to do that. I think it's important to put steps in place that we can actually be present with God to hear his counsel. Otherwise, we can miss it. The other thing of this as well, have we got the slide, Brian? The miraculous counselor. So the other thing that I was considering when I was thinking about, and David made a good point here. He said that when we're thinking about counselors, Jesus isn't like a typical counselor. It's not like the counselor that we think of today. And as I was reflecting on this and thinking about Jesus being the wonderful counselor, I thought about how I came to Jesus. And I think I've shared this story before. Before I came to Christ, when I arrived in Australia, I was doing a lot of journaling. I was writing down thoughts and things like that and how I felt. And at that time, it's quite a common saying that you'll hear people say. They'll say that everything in moderation. Moderation is quite subjective. And for me at that time, it was like even illicit substances, even drugs. Everything in moderation. 2 or 3 times a week, it doesn't matter. It's just moderation. It becomes very subjective. And then when I came to know Jesus, when I came to Christ, I forgot that I'd written all of that. And it wasn't until a few months after coming to Christ that I started writing again. And I looked back on that, and I didn't even recognize who I was. I didn't recognize the person. It wasn't the same person. I thought, how could I have ever written anything like that? It just wasn't me. My mind had been transformed. My mind had been transformed, and there's something miraculous about that. When you're thinking about Jesus being the miraculous counselor, when we're looking at that word wonderful counselor, I don't think it does it justice. It can be incomprehensible counselor, extraordinary counselor. There's something that Jesus does to our minds and hearts when we come to him. I wasn't even going to church at the time, rarely going to church. I was reading my Bible, but I wasn't sitting with it. Nobody was really instructing me. Nobody was saying, well, think this and think that and think that. It was miraculous. My mind had just been changed by coming to know Jesus Christ. He's the miraculous counselor. He's the extraordinary counselor, the incomprehensible counselor, the one who changes hearts and minds. For me, and I think for all of us, we're given that mind of Christ. We're given the mind of Jesus. That counseling is not like sitting in front of somebody and somebody making suggestions and advices. He changes our hearts, our minds, and our souls. So I think that when we're transformed by the Spirit, when we're transformed by community, when we're transformed by the Spirit, when we're in community, when we're in Scripture, and we stop, we breathe, and we meditate on Jesus, when we meditate on his word, that we actually can gain his counsel. We can actually start to think, if you're thinking about, I've had a few discussions recently with people thinking about where to send their children to school. How do you make that choice? How do we discern where to send the child to school? How do we discern who to marry? How do we discern where to study? How do we discern what career to choose? And it's in community, reading the scriptures, being with people, taking that time to be with God, stopping, reflecting, meditating. If we're so busy, we can end up making the wrong choice. But I think when God gives that counsel as well, the counsel, or let's say if God gives us the counsel, he gives us the guidance, and we think it's clear, the clarity does not always mean peace. I think as Christians, sometimes we think that clarity can mean peace. Well, God's given me this direction, I'm at peace. And sometimes that can be the case, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes there's no peace at all. Sometimes it feels like we're going into battle, into the fire, yet God has still given us that guidance, and God has still given us that counsel. I think about Job and what happened to Job, the suffering that he went through. He didn't feel peace. He had God's counsel, kind of knew God in it, but he didn't have peace. Think about David, when David was being hunted down, when King David was being hunted down by Saul. He wasn't king at the time, but he was being hunted down by Saul. Did he have peace? He didn't have peace, but he knew God's counsel. God was speaking to him, but he didn't have peace. Consider Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Did he have peace? He was distressed unto death. He was sweating blood. Did he have peace? I think he had anxiety. He was anxious about the situation. He knew where he was going. He had God's guidance. He knew exactly what was going on, but I don't think he had peace. And also God's counsel, God's guidance, God's plan, in one sense, is not always clear. It's not always clear. A bit contradictory. It can be clear, but it might not always be clear. I was sitting with a lady the other day, and in the hospital, and she had been diagnosed with cancer. It was a wonderful conversation to have. She was in a lot of distress. She had a child, and we discussed about the child growing up and not being able to see the child and things like that, and getting married and so on and so forth. But in the midst of this discussion, I asked her how she was feeling, and what was she feeling? How did she make sense of it? And what she expressed, I thought it was an absolute amazing conversation, and it was really authentic and it was really honest. And she said she was angry with God. She was fuming with God because of what was going on. And she started to talk about the injustice. How is it that there's people in the world who are wretched and walk around fine? And how is it that there can be good mothers who suffer and go through this? And she was really honest and open and said, this, it's rage. It infuriates her. And she's angry at God. And I was like, I commended her for her faith. Because in that wasn't an absence of faith. It was real faith. It was like a Job-like faith, wasn't it? And she goes into the valley and she comes on the mountain. She's there for a while and she's tearing, she's crying and she's distressed, and then she comes out of it. And it was wonderful. a wonderful testimony of faith that she can express those emotions to God. Now, should she stay angry at God? Is God unjust? I don't think God is unjust. I don't think this is God's fault. However, there's something of that Job-like faith in expressing that. But to me, it also spoke of this, that in God's guidance, in God's leading, sometimes it's not clear. Who knows why those things are happening to her? God knows. But if you think about the scriptures, then you think about the way that things pan out, even the life of Jesus. When Jesus is going to the cross, nobody understands. No one knows what's going on. Jesus explains it. He says, he's going to the cross, he's going to be crucified, then he'll raise the third day. But no one gets it. No one understands. No one understands the plan of God, the guidance of God, the counsel of God in all of this until the end. Until the end, when he's resurrected. Then it all makes sense. And so sometimes in our lives, there's going to be things that don't make sense. We're not going to understand the counsel of God, the guidance of God, the plan of God. But we are called to trust him. And we may not know until the end, until we go to be with him. So it's a bit contradictory. Sometimes it can be clear, sometimes it's not clear. But that's the way that it is. We're in a relationship with God. We're not worshipping an idol, a statue. It's a relationship. But in all of this, it forms us and it transforms us. There's one thing that I think with this as well, and perhaps one reason why God doesn't always reveal his plan, his purpose, his guidance, and his counsel. One reason is that he's more interested in us being transformed than being informed. You know, can you imagine that if every time we were going to make a decision that God actually came to us and said, go this way, go this way, go this way, I would push back, like my boy. He pushes back. I would push back. But there's something about the experience. There's something about the journey, the relationship with God. And it reminded me of, I used to be a cobbler, fixing shoes, cutting keys, engraving. And if you've done an apprentice, you might have had this experience as well, that when you first start the apprenticeship, you want to get hands-on. But often what happens is just somebody telling you how to do the job. And to me, that's not helpful. You know, somebody's just saying, well, you know, you get the shoe and you do this and you do that. You just like, there's something about being hands-on and then somebody teaching you at the same time the experience of doing the job, which is helpful. And that means sometimes we're going to stuff up. Sometimes we're going to make mistakes. I remember there was a particular lady who came in. This particular lady, I got into trouble. And she brought a bracelet. And on this bracelet, she wanted something engraved. I was like, yeah, that's fine. It was a busy day, and it was a Sunday in the city. And so I took it to the engraving machine. I engraved this bracelet. And I stuffed it up. Didn't do it right. And so I thought, what I'll do, if you've ever been into a cobbler shop, you see the things that you put the shoe on and it polishes the shoe. So what you can do if you stuff up engraving, you can put it on the buffer and it buffers the words out. However, I was honest. I wasn't going to lie to her. So she came back in and I said to her, look, I'm really sorry. I said, I've engraved it. I stuffed it up. But however, I buffed it out, so it's fine. You can take it somewhere else. I just wasn't in the mood to be doing it. Take it to someone else. And she was furious at me. She goes, you've stolen silver from my bracelet. I was like, well, perhaps technically I did. I don't know. It's in the buffer somewhere. But you wouldn't know. The weight there wouldn't be no difference. Well, maybe there'd be a slight difference in the weight. You wouldn't notice it. Anyways, I was in trouble. I was really apologetic. And she was angry. She was furious at me. But, kind of makes me question, is honesty always the best policy? And then perhaps honesty with a bit of wisdom, might be helpful. Either way, the point being is that when we get ourselves into situations like this, God, the way that God works, the way that God leads us, the way that God counsels us and guides us, it's like on-the-job training. It's like being in an apprenticeship with Jesus. He allows us to get our hands dirty. And sometimes we're going to stuff up. Sometimes we're going to make mistakes. And I think that's okay. We're still in God's hand. Like the prediction of God. When the prediction of Isaiah comes, and it goes all the way, 2,700 years, all the way through. People make mistakes. People stuff up. They make the wrong choices. They make the right choices. But we're still in God's hands. We're still in his hands. And I think that's the important thing to take about this, that Jesus is such the extraordinary counselor that he can handle everything about us. He's always with us. He's always with us. Let us go now into a time of communion.